The first item is the list of the stages of the Haggadah, the 15 stages, the Simonim. So there are 15 of them. Now, one very peculiar element, this is not noticed by many people. If you say this at your Seder this year, you'll definitely get points. If you read them 1 to 15, it reads like this: 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. There's an and between 1 and 2, and from there on out, there are no ands. That's very peculiar. That's very peculiar. You want the list to be explicit, put in 14 ands. Join them all together. You want to think of it just as punctuated by commas, leave all the ands out. No, we're going to put one and in and nothing else. Now, the meaning that I attach to this is the following. The first one is Kaddish, which means sanctify. Second one is Rahatz, which means to wash. Without pushing too deeply into symbolism, to sanctify means to take something and elevate it. Make it holy. To wash it means there's something wrong with it. Something dirty on it. That has to be taken off. There are two dimensions of self-improvement. One is to add to your positive, and the other is remove what's negative. There is a great discussion in Jewish sources, the order in which a person should do that. Should he first eliminate the things that are bad in him, and after that, when he's achieved a certain purity, work on improving the positive? Or the other way around. Start by improving the positive, and only then work on eliminating what's bad. There's a famous verse that in the Psalms by King David, Sur me'rav aseh tov. Turn away from evil and do good. Seems like King David is telling us that removing the negative comes first and building the positive comes second. And there are movements of Jewish self-improvement in the Musar world that talk about that. They definitely talk about that. On the other hand, in the Shemona Esrei, in the second of the blessings of petition, we say, Hashivenu avinu l'sorasecha, v'korvenu malkeinu l'avodasecha. Bring us back, our Father, to your Torah. Bring us close, our King, to your service. Both of those are emphasizing the positive, connection to Torah, serving God. And only after that do we say, return us in complete tshuva, which takes off the negative, before you. So in the Shemona Esrei, it looks like we have the opposite order. Now, what does it look like here? Well, the 15 steps, 1 and 2 are joined by an and, so then make a unit. The first one is Kadesh, which is emphasized the positive, and the second is Rahatz, which means wash off the negative. So that sounds like the Shemona Esrei, and it doesn't sound like the verse of King David. And I must tell you that the Hasidic movement definitely stresses that. Work on building the positive. Only after you started that way should you then turn and try to eliminate the negative. Well, what shall we do about the verse? King David's verse is 100% emes. So how are we going to reconcile it with this position? The answer is, King David indeed says, remove the negative before you stress the positive. But maybe he's not describing steps 1 and 2. Maybe he's describing steps 2 and 3. Instead of thinking of it as a 2-step process, think of it as a 3-step process. And here's the message. Self-improvement has two forms, as we just mentioned. Removing the negative and strengthening the positive. And it should be obvious that almost always in your life, when you think of improving yourself, you are working on strengthening the positive. Almost always. You pick out the things that you're already good at, and you work to make them better. If you are talented at putting a medium-sized ball in a hoop, and you are hopeless at hitting a tiny ball with a stick, you don't go in for golf. You go in for basketball because you're already good at it. If you're terrific at equations, and when you look at another person, you can't tell whether he's depressed or joyful, you don't become a psychologist. You become a mathematician. You go in for the things that you're good at. So, the idea here is a three-stage process. First, take the things you're already good at and make them better. When you do that, first of all, you gain self-confidence. You're making progress. You see that you're capable of growing. With that self-confidence, turn to the things that are negative and eliminate them, which then purifies you and brings you to a position where you can do the positive perfectly without any negatives going on along for the ride. That's what King David's talking about. King David's talking about getting to the perfect position. To get to the perfect position, you have to eliminate the negative before you get there. That's true. But that doesn't tell you how to start. You start by working on improving the positive, and then use that strength, that forward motion, forward inertia, to eliminate the negative, and then finally strengthen the positive so you're in a positive position. That would be the Hasidic approach, and that explains why there's a vav, an and, between the first two steps and not anywhere elsewhere. Okay, we're together? Now, the next thing in the Haggadah is Kiddush. And this Kiddush has there's a lot. I'm going to go through phrase by phrase. This year I'm going to do something which I don't usually do because this year Pesach comes out on Shabbos. And therefore we will have the full, I would say double Kiddush, part recognizing Shabbos and part recognizing the holiday. And that will have a lot to teach us. But let's go through it first, phrase by phrase. I'm skipping the first paragraph, was a quotation from the book of Genesis, and the Rabbi Gottlieb. I'm not going to talk about that. The main blessing. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, King of the universe, who chose us from all people, lifted us up. They probably translate exalted, but that's what it means to lift up. From all languages, and sanctified us with his commandments. There are a few important morals here. What makes us special? What makes the Jewish people unique? Is it that God chose us and gave us his Torah at Sinai? When he gave us the Torah, that transformed us into a different nation, and that's how we became special. Kiddush here says no. Because sanctifying us with his commandment is third. And before that, it says he chose us from all people and lifted us up above all languages. And sanctified us with the commandments comes only after that. So obviously we were special before he gave us the Torah. And indeed, it seems that those two prior conditions are the groundwork for giving us the Torah. So, what do they refer to? Now, he chose us from all people. God's choices aren't arbitrary. You know, if you're choosing an item for a project, you investigate it, you evaluate it, you compare it with the project that you have, and you choose it on that basis. If he chose us from all people, and he chose us in order to give us the Torah, there must be something in us that makes us more fit for this project than other people's. God is not in the habit of shooting himself in the foot. I know that sounds flippant, but it's a way to get the idea across. And if, let's say, the Chinese or the Nigerians or the Eskimos would be more fit to living the life that the Torah sets for the world, God wouldn't choose us who are less fit and leave them who are more fit out of the picture. So by the very fact that he chose us, it means that we have already acquired characteristics that make us more fit for that project. That's what the patriarchs and matriarchs achieved. They created for the Jewish people certain basic characteristics. That's what our experience up until Sinai created for us, including the slavery in Egypt and the salvation from Egypt, the miraculous liberation from Egypt. All of that gave us a certain unique national character, which made us more fit to live the life that the Torah wants us to live than other nations.
Yeah. I heard from somewhere that in Mitzrayim, a lot of the Jews really missed the life of their forefathers, and they wanted to live that way, and they regretted coming to Egypt. And this is before Moshe even came about.
You're absolutely right. And the sources also say that before they left, 80% died. That's a lot. So those are the ones who, even after 8 plagues, didn't get the message and couldn't elevate themselves to the point that the Torah wanted. So they were left behind. They didn't make it out.
That was plague darkness, right?
That's right. That's right. Which was the 9th plague. 8 plagues, and they still didn't get the message.
Which one of the 3 commandments? Hashem said 3 times, I heard, not to go back to Egypt. When they were by the ocean, before they crossed, was one of them. I just forgot which one it was. Was it not to go back on this road again?
There are verses that talk about not going back to Egypt, and it means, okay, so it's a complicated story in legal terms. At any rate, that's the verse. Now, what does it mean to say that he exalted us above every language? I'm not going to do a real depth job here. Language is a very complex subject. But I want to make my point by playing it off what a French linguist said in the end of the 19th century. He said, we in France are very, very fortunate because the French language is suited to the way people naturally think. For example, in French, the noun comes first and the adjectives come afterwards. House, big, blue, expensive. Not expensive, big, blue house. That's the way the mind thinks, and that's the way the French language expresses it. And this linguist said, pity the poor English. Since the mind thinks noun, adjective, 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 and the English language puts the adjectives first, the poor British are handicapped. They're crippled because their language doesn't fit with the way the mind works. Poor fellow, it didn't occur to him that maybe language affects the development of the mind, and the French mind works the way French expresses itself, and the English mind works the way the English expresses itself. That never occurred to him, which is a far more likely hypothesis than thinking that the English walk around crippled because their language doesn't fit the way the mind works. But what you have here is a point I think is very profound. The language that you speak has a great deal to do with how you think. The words, their associations, the structure of the language will have an impact on how the mind thinks. Then it's very important what language you speak. And it's very important to pay careful attention to the language and to be very suspicious of translations. For example, the word shalom in Hebrew is translated in almost every dictionary as peace. That's quite far off, because in English, peace is a negative concept. Peace means the absence of disturbance. You can say in English that the graveyard is very peaceful. And indeed it is. There's no noise there, no disturbances. You could never use the word shalom in Hebrew for a graveyard. You could never do that. It would be atrocious. Shalom comes from a root which means shalem, which means complete, whole, integrated, perfect. So when the English negotiator says, we're offering you peace, and he uses the word shalom to express it, it's a complete distortion. We're not looking for putting down the guns. We're looking for trust and integration and solidarity. At any rate, God chosen for every language means the Hebrew language creates a form of thought and a form of experience that is a precursor, a precondition for receiving the Torah. Now we come to the third. God sanctified us with his commandments. This has a double meaning. First of all, every time a Jew performs a commandment, he achieves a certain measure of sanctity thereby. He elevates himself. He gives himself a piece of holiness. Partly because the word mitzvah, as the Gemara explains it, in part built on the letters tzad vav. Tzad vav, tzad means to connect. So a mitzvah automatically connects a person to God. When it does that, it elevates the person. So he sanctified us with his commandments by each commandment sanctifying the person who performs it. That's only one half of the meaning, however. When God gave us the Torah, the act of giving us the Torah qualified us with a certain inherent sanctity to be able to perform the commandments. If you aren't capable of sanctity, you can't perform a commandment. You can go through the motions, you can pretend, but you will not be performing the commandment. So there's a double sanctity that took place once and forever by giving us the Torah at Sinai, and the extension of that, at every time a Jew does a mitzvah, he acquires a certain sanctity. That's the third element in the Kiddush. You gave us, Hashem our God, with love, Sabbaths for rest, holidays for joy, and then holidays for another kind of joy. So I'll come back to the Shabbos when we get to the end of the paragraph. Let's talk here about the three words for holiday: Moed, Chag, and Zman. They are very different words with very different connotations. Moed means a time of meeting. Avad is a committee in Hebrew. The tent where Moses went to commune with God was called the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, because that's where God and Moses communicated. So sometimes Moed is translated as appointed time. That's the way you could understand its use in certain contexts. But the literal meaning of the word is a meeting time. And that means that you have to think of a holiday as a time when a meeting between the human being and God is available. Now, this idea of a meeting has different applications. Some of you know that there are 3 Jewish pilgrimage festivals. 3 festivals when the original mitzvah was to go to Jerusalem. From Tiberia, from Tzfas, from Beersheba, from all over the country, to go to Jerusalem to appear in the temple. That's literally a meeting. That's literally a meeting. The Parsha in Emo, which describes all of the holidays of the year, uses this term of Moed also for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The Pri Tzaddik explains that on Rosh Hashanah, when you blow the shofar, the Talmud says blowing the shofar is as if you are standing in the Holy of Holies of the temple. So you're already projected into a position like the temple, so that automatically becomes a time of meeting. Yom Kippur, the verse says, Lifnei Hashem tithoru, purify yourselves before God. It's as if you're standing before God in the temple. So there too, although you don't go physically to the temple on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, but spiritually, it's also as if you are there. What about Shabbos? Shabbos in that context is also called Moed. So there the Pri Tzaddik says something quite striking. Shabbos, he says, yes, Shabbos is a time that God is available for meeting also. But here it's reversed, because there's a verse that says, Shabbos-i b'chol moshvosechem. It's Shabbos in all your habitations. Wherever you are, the Shabbos comes to you. So yes, there's a moed, a meeting with God on Shabbos, but there's because he makes himself available to you. You don't have to go to him. You don't have to go to him physically, and you don't have to go to him spiritually. That's moed.
Who says that, sorry?
Pri Tzaddik, Reb Tzaddik HaKohen. Great, great Hasidic philosopher. The word Chag refers to what you do to celebrate the holiday. More specifically, it refers to the sacrifice that you bring in the temple when you appear in the temple. And Zman, the word Zman means time. Because, as everyone knows, these are anniversaries. The anniversaries of events. Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of the creation of the world. Sort of. Anybody know how Rosh Hashanah is related to the creation of the world? What happened on Rosh Hashanah is that Adam was created. That's on the 6th day of creation. So when we say on Rosh Hashanah that this is the beginning of the creation, strictly speaking, it's the 6th day. But everything else is just backdrop. Everything else is just backdrop. It's just stage props. When Adam is created, the world has its purpose. The real creation is Adam. The real creation is Adam. So that's Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur is the day when God finally forgave the Jewish people for the golden calf and gave Moses the second tablets. Pesach is the anniversary of liberation from Egypt. Shavuos is the anniversary of receiving the Torah at Sinai. Sukkot is the anniversary, in a certain sense, of the clouds of glory. That's the whole story. Because we got the clouds of glory when we left Egypt. What would we be doing celebrating the clouds of glory in the fall, 6 months later? So one explanation that the Torah gives is that if you're going to celebrate the clouds of glory by leaving your house and going out and living in a thatched roof hut, if you do that in the spring, when we indeed left Egypt, no one will know that you're doing it to symbolize anything. It's cool in a thatched roof hut, especially in Israel where the rainy season is over, so you don't need a solid roof. So people will say you're moving out for your convenience. If you do it in the fall, they won't say that. That's what the Torah says. And by the way, this used to bother me because in Israel it can be quite warm in the fall. It can be quite warm in the fall. And actually it can be more comfortable in a sukkah in the fall than being indoors. So why would anybody catch the symbolism in one of those years where you're having what Americans call an Indian summer, and it's quite warm? The answer is very simple. Even if it's warm, it's cooler outside, you're not going to move into the cooler habitation 3 months before the winter starts. I'm sorry, 3 weeks before the winter starts. That's ridiculous. If you want a cooler place to be, you'll be there all summer. So you move in the fall. You'll move in the spring. I'm telling you, I'm still jet lagged. I can't talk straight. If you are doing it for convenience sake, you wouldn't wait till 3 weeks before the end of summer to do it. You do it in the spring, and you spend all summer in that more comfortable habitation. So that's what the Torah says. You're going to celebrate it. You're going to celebrate it only in the fall because then it'll be symbolic. The Gaon of Vilna says something very striking and very exact. He says when we committed the golden calf, one of the punishments was we lost the clouds of glory. When did they come back? They came back on the first day of Sukkot, on the 15th day of Tishrei, after Moses came down from the mountain with the second tablets and received them. We started the construction of the tabernacle. They came back on the 15th. And that's why we celebrate it then. We celebrate it then because we're celebrating the second clouds, not the first clouds. By calling them Zmanim, we're saying that these events are anniversaries. Now, the idea of an anniversary in Jewish thought is a very deep idea. The symbol of history, development history in Jewish terms, is what some people call a spiral, though I've been told, and I looked it up, that not everybody takes it this way, or the shape of a corkscrew, is something that looks like this. On the one hand, there's a circular motion. That means each year when you come back to the same date, it's the same date. On the other hand, there's a forward motion also. It's the composition of those two motions, so that when you go around, you're not back in exactly the same place where you were last year, but you're in the same orientation vis-a-vis the circle. That means that this year's date is related to last year's date in real terms. When a date has a certain event that takes place on it, that reveals the character of the date. And when you return to that date, that character repeats itself. We were liberated on the 15th day of Nisan. Every 15th of Nisan is a liberation day. That's why when we come back to these anniversaries, we do the same thing that they did. Otherwise, why would you celebrate it by doing the same thing that they did? We have a Seder because they had a Seder in Egypt. So what? They were leaving Egypt. I'm not leaving Egypt, but I am. Because the 15th of Nisan is a liberation day. And so it is throughout the year. We light the menorah on Hanukkah because they lit the menorah in the temple. We feast on Pesach, on Purim, because that's what they did on the 14th and Shush on the 15th day of Adar. They feasted, so we feast, because the day has the same potential as it had then. That's why calling it Zman here is very important, meaning time, date. Now, the Kiddush goes on. On this day, we're celebrating the fact that this day is a day of Shabbos, as I said, we'll come back to, and it is Chag HaMatzos. Chag HaMatzos, this festival of matzos. The Kedushas Levi has a very profound observation here, based on a verse in the Torah, but he applies the observation to the names of the holidays. What holiday is coming up now? What's the next holiday on our calendar? Pesach. Pesach. That's what everybody says. That's what everybody calls it. That's not what we said here. Here we said the festival Chag HaMatzos. Nowhere in the entire Tanakh, in 1,000 pages of Tanakh, is this holiday called Pesach. Nowhere. That's our name for it, not God's name. Why would we have a different name? Why would he have a different name? Why would that happen? Says the Pri Tzadik, Kedushas Levi, says the Kedushas Levi, because each of us names the holiday in terms of the other one's reality, in terms of the other one's position. God's name for the holiday is Holiday of Matzos because we performed the mitzvah of matzos. We call the holiday Pesach because that's what he did. He saved our firstborn when the Egyptian firstborn were being destroyed. Same thing is true with Rosh Hashanah. Nowhere in the entire Tanakh is the beginning of the year called Rosh Hashanah. Never. Do you know what it's called in the Torah?
It's different names. No?
Well, let's have them. There are two which are related to one another. One's called Yom Teruah. Very good. The day of the shofar blast. And the other one is Zichron Teruah. The memory of the shofar blast. Both of them refer to the Teruah. Why? Because the Teruah is what we do. So God's name for the holiday is in terms of what we do. Our name for the holiday is Rosh Hashanah because that's what he does. Yom Kippur, we have the same name, although in Hebrew it's Yom Kippurim. Shavuos. What does the word Shavuos mean? Weeks. Means weeks. Why would the holiday be called weeks? Because we count 7 weeks from the end of from the second day of Pesach until you get to Shavuos. We count those 7 weeks. We counted the weeks to get there, and the holiday is a result of that count. By the way, there is a position that the count is no longer biblically binding, and there's a sub-position which says that since the count isn't binding but biblically, the holiday of Shavuos is only rabbinic. The whole holiday is only rabbinic. Because if you don't count, you can't get there. Not everybody agrees to that, but that's how serious it is. So God says, my name for the holiday is what the Jews do. The Jews are counting. Our name for the holiday is Atzeres. Atzeres means holding back something that otherwise would dissipate. God created something on Pesach. We'll talk about this in great detail. And he held it so it shouldn't dissipate. Again, it refers to what God does, not what we do. So you have this duality that we're looking at it from God's point of view, and he's looking at it from our point of view, says the Kedushas Levi, that's typical of a love relationship. When you love someone, at least part of you is dedicated to looking at the world through the other one's eyes. And that's what's expressed by these coordinated differences between the names of the holidays. Okay? Okay, now, Mikra Kodesh means a day that is designated to be holy, and this refers to various mitzvahs like dressing in fine clothes and having good meals. Now, Zman Cherusenu. the time of our freedom, there are different words in Hebrew for freedom. Cherus is one word, chofesh is another word. Chofesh also means freedom. Chofesh is a negative concept. Chofesh means released from things that bind you, things that restrict you, things that hold you back.
That's not positive.
Correct. It's negative. Did I say positive?
No. You said it was negative.
Right, correct.
But like, I don't see how it's negative, but I see how it's not positive.
Okay, you know, maybe I used the wrong word. I think I hear where you're coming from. Well, by negative, I didn't mean bad. I just meant it's the absence of something. I should say it you're right. I take it back. The word negative connotes that it's bad. I'm not saying that. Although, I will say it in a minute. I wasn't saying it yet. It's totally absence. There's nothing holding me back, nothing tying me down. The things that were holding me or preventing me are gone. But if that's the whole concept of freedom you have, just get out of my way, get off my back. Don't restrict me. If that's your whole concept of freedom, then you are in a bad position. There's a verse which stresses this: "Ba'mesim chofshi." It associates being chofshi with death. Yeah, when you're dead, nothing binds you. That's true.
Freedom without a cause is death.
I think that's right. I think that's well put. Freedom without a cause, not freedom from, without freedom to or freedom for, is a terrible condition for a human being to be in. First of all, what about rules of morality? They don't bind you. Rules of morality mean that you can't just do as the whim moves you. You have to recognize that there are responsibilities, that the world has to be improved, the world has to be made into a better place, it shouldn't be hurt. And then, this is a philosophical point that I want to make here, how should we think about rules? Maybe I mentioned this to some of you, I don't remember. But many people think of rules as restricting you because a rule says you have to do this. And it's true, rules in a certain sense restrict, but it can be that the very same rule that restricts also provides you with a freedom you didn't otherwise have.
Well, yeah, you can't say that all laws must be subjective. Some things cannot be subjective. Like, we can't say, like, oh, well, if you want to decide to kill people, we can't really bind you on anything because how you think about it is your opinion and we should respect that.
That's true, but it's not the point that I'm making. Some rules that say you can't do X actually create more freedom, not less. Together with telling you can't do X, to create more freedom. I'll give you two types of examples. First of all, consider our terribly victimized plight. There are highways, roads to drive on. Every one of us loses 50% of the road. 50% of the road is off limits because you can only drive on the right side of the road. You can't drive on the left side of the road. Given the direction you're going in, 50% is off limits. What a terrible restriction. I've lost 50% of my freedom. Of course, if you don't have that restriction, no one will go anywhere. What shall you say? Anybody can drive in any direction he wants, then no one will get anywhere. By depriving you of 50%, you get the freedom to travel. Otherwise, you don't have the freedom to travel.
Yeah, like, you see, before they made roads in America, there was the first two cars in North America. You can look it up. It's a fact. Both of the first two cars, the only two in existence, crashed into each other.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay, that's a terrific confirmation of what I'm saying. That is amazing.
There were no roads.
Okay, very good.
Look it up. It's true.
That's amazing. Okay? Now, that's one type of example. But here's another type of example. We're playing a game of chess. Okay? In the middle of the game, I take my knight and I move it forward 3 paces, 1, 2, 3, and I take off your queen. And you say, you can't do that. I say, what do you mean? It's very easy. Watch, I'll do it again. 1, 2, 3, bang, off with your queen. I say, wait a minute. You can't do that in chess. Right. You can't play chess unless you play by the rules. The rules create the game. If you decide you're not going to play by the rules, you've lost your freedom to play the game. The rules of chess create the freedom to play the game. Similarly, there are rules of language, rules how to speak. Now you meet a red-blooded, independent American who says, don't tell me what to do. I speak as I please. And, plus blue. Yeah, you could say whatever you want, but you can't communicate. because what you say has no meaning. The rules of English, among other things, determine what strings of words are meaningful and what aren't. And if you want to communicate, you've got to abide by the rules. That means that the rules make communication possible. When the rules say speak this way and not that way, they make communication possible. Without them, you can't communicate. So rules, when they tell you you can't do X, Y, Z, sometimes create for you opportunities that otherwise you won't have. Now I can go back to your example of moral rules, but I can make my point in this context. What about a person who says, promises, not interested. Not interested, I can say I promise, but I don't take it seriously, and I don't necessarily keep them, and so forth and so on. Such a person who won't obey the rule of fulfilling promises can't have certain types of human relationships. Because certain human relationships are based on trust. And if he's not trustworthy, he can't have those relationships. No one will enter into a business relationship with him. No one's going to commit their lives to him in a serious relationship because he's utterly untrustworthy. So the rule of fulfilling your promises makes certain relationships possible. It creates that freedom. So rules can be a two-edged sword. Every rule says you must do something or you can't do something. That's true. But in saying that, it may open up freedoms for you that you didn't otherwise have. That's cherus. The word cherus in Hebrew means freedom to or freedom for. My Rabbi Zatzal pointed out that the same letters make the word charus. Charus means engraved. And it stands for engraved on the tablets. In the tablets of the 10 pronouncements at Sinai, the words were engraved on the tablets. Then the word that's used in the Hebrew is charus alaluchos. My Rabbi Zatzal said, when you say Zman Cherusenu on Pesach, you should think ahead and say, I'm looking forward already to Shavuos. We'll talk about this in great detail. I'm looking forward already to Shavuos, the time in which I will receive those tablets, because my freedom is for the sake of that. My freedom is for the sake of, freedom to, not just freedom from. It's not chofish, it's cherus. Okay?